There's no good version of this. There's no good buyer of a major studio. That's not what
Mm-mm.
the industry is. Whether it's Paramount or Netflix, we're essentially eating a shit sandwich and arguing over the bread. This is the Box Office Podcast, and welcome to Exhibition Endgame. What looks like to be a terrifying 12 to 18 months ahead of us as everybody in this industry figures out what exactly is going to happen with the fate of Warner Brothers. Joining me here on this panel is Rebecca Pauley and Chad Kenrick from Box Office Pro, and I am Daniel Aria, the editorial director of Box Office Pro, the pulse of theatrical exhibition. In this week's episode, you guessed it, we are going over everything we know, we don't know, and that we're guessing about concerning the Netflix acquisition of Warner Brothers. That's right, the streaming platform is taking over the iconic Hollywood studio with a proposed acquisition set to close in the next 12 to 18 months. But that's not the end of the story, as Skydance Paramount is countering with an offer of their own and threats of a hostile takeover of Warner Brothers. A lot to unpack. We'll try to go as detailed as we can. And in the second half of this episode, we'll be hearing from our tech partners over at Christie Digital about the latest technologies from that company. They're just wrapping up their presence over at Cine Asia 2025. Rebecca Pauley speaks with Alan Fernandez, Senior Product Manager over at Christie. Chad, Rebecca, I usually open this up by asking you guys what you saw last weekend, but even though we were on the edge of our seat starting on Friday, it wasn't because we were at the movies, it's because we've been tracking this story and trying to make sense of it. Let's start with what we know here, guys. I'm going to start by outlining just the facts of what's in, and we'll go from there, basically, step by step. The Netflix bid. Warner Brothers put itself up for sale earlier this year. They waited for a number of bids. They got one from Netflix, one from Skydance Paramount, one from Comcast, representing NBC Universal. Netflix ends up being the winning bid. Netflix stands to acquire everything but the cable channels, essentially, from Warner Brothers. That means that the cable channels are going to be spinning off to a new company that's expected to be completed by Q3. Now, that was always the plan for Warner Brothers Discovery. They always expected to separate the studio and the streaming business into a separate company and the TV properties into their own independent company. The only thing Netflix is buying here is the studio and the streamer. Now, this spinoff is expected to be completed by Q3 of 2026, by which point the active part of the acquisition can get started. Netflix currently putting that control of Warner Brothers in a time frame of 12 to 18 months, really putting the Netflix control of the iconic studio starting at some point in 2027. Now, I say if because it is a big if. We don't know if there are going to be any regulatory concerns over this acquisition. We'll be going over the politicians' reaction to the news with Rebecca Pauley shortly. But that is essentially what we know from Netflix. Now, early morning on Monday, we got word that Paramount put in a counter bid even higher than the Netflix original bid and willing to acquire the entirety of Warner Brothers Discovery, including those TV channels. Now, that higher bid is currently being assessed by the Warner Brothers board. We expect an answer on this counteroffer at some point next week. But even if the board doesn't want to go with it, there is always a possibility that Paramount Skydance goes after a hostile takeover with this increased bid, appealing directly to shareholders to gain control of the company. That's still a possibility. Netflix, in the back of all this, saying that they completely expected Paramount Skydance to come in with this sort of maneuver and that they are confident that their bid will provide the best value. Before we move on here, Rebecca, you wrote the story on the Paramount counteroffer on our website. What are the details here?
They actually have a website that they've set up to kind of argue their case, argue their side of the story. strongerhollywood.com, basically to say that they are willing to invest the industry in the future of Warner Brothers Discovery in a way that is more meaningful than what Netflix would do, saying Paramount strongly believes in the value of releasing feature movies in theaters and will continue to do so for the theatrical content of both Paramount and WBD Studios. On the other hand, I know with Netflix, they have said they, quote, expect to continue to release Warner Brothers films theatrically. And this question of theatrical exhibition, of how much Netflix versus Paramount would really be invested in the cinema industry and the cinema ecosystem, echoes some concerns that we heard earlier in the response from industry organizations to that Netflix proposal. Chad, what's some of the stuff we heard on that side?
Yeah, from Cinema United President and CEO Michael O'Leary, his quote there saying the proposed acquisition of Warner Brothers by Netflix poses an unprecedented threat to the global exhibition business. And just going on to say the negative impact of that acquisition will impact theaters from the biggest circuits all the way down to the one-screen independents in small towns around the United States and around the world. We're hearing similar things from all of the different guilds here in the United States. Pretty much across the board, everyone raising concerns there. We also heard from the Producers Guild, Directors Guild, and SAG-AFTRA as well. But I would say the WGA was probably the strongest statement, where they ended their statement saying this merger must be blocked.
Yeah. It's, I think, a forceful denunciation of the consolidation that we have right in front of us. Right now, Netflix is the party that we are talking about. It will be interesting to see how these voices amplify or not concerning the Paramount acquisition. And you know, guys, we try not to curse in this podcast, but I will make an exception for this one case because I think it calls for it. There's no good version of this. There's no good buyer of a major studio. That's not where the industry is. Whether it's Paramount or Netflix, we're essentially eating a shit sandwich and arguing over the bread. It doesn't matter what bread you use. You're eating a shit sandwich. That's what we're doing. That's what losing Warner Brothers is going to mean. There's going to be different levels of bad regarding whoever buys it. But should either of these acquisitions happen, I think exhibition has to brace and adapt into a new way of doing business. And I think part of that has already been done during the pandemic. We'll go over what it looks like moving forward. Now, there is always the hope, and there is always the possibility that the government sees either or both a Netflix or Paramount acquisition of Warner Brothers as anti-competitive. To that regard, I know we've heard from Elizabeth Warren already speak out.
Yeah, Warren, just an evocative phrase as shit sandwich. But she did say that the Netflix Warner Brothers deal would be an anti-monopoly nightmare. And for the Paramount Warner Brothers deal, were that to happen, that would be, quote, a 5-alarm antitrust fire. Sentiments echoed by Bernie Sanders, basically saying, like, this is an oligarchy, these are monopolistic practices. This is what we have anti-monopoly laws to prevent. So, yeah, definitely a lot of strong feelings on the political side of things.
And let's not forget on the Republican side, we've got a representative like Darrell Issa already going out and voicing strong opposition to either a Netflix or Paramount takeover of Warner Brothers. So this really is a situation where you have representatives and senators from both parts of the political spectrum already warning about what this can mean, not only to the business, but to consumers. We have the president of the country not really voicing any support for either scenarios, but saying that he is committed to looking at what the market share implications are of any such deal. So it's not like this deal is going to walk through the finish line here. There is always a possibility this collapses before our eyes. I have a feeling, however, that that's not going to be the end of the conversation when it comes to consolidation, because let's look at what's happened in the cinema industry in the last 2 months. On the exhibition side, multinational Kinepolis buying Imagine Entertainment out of Michigan. That's the first major acquisition from an existing exhibitor taking over another one. Of course, we know of last year's Sony takeover of Alamo, but that's a studio taking over an exhibitor. Before the pandemic, we had a number of big acquisitions from major multinational exhibitors taking over other multinational or leading exhibition chains. So the consolidation in terms of exhibitors is continuing to happen after a little break, as we saw with Kinepolis Imagine. On the cinema advertising side, really, the last couple of weeks in the year, we heard that NCM, one of the biggest cinema advertising companies, had acquired Spotlight Cinema Networks, which will continue existing as its own division inside of NCM. That's another big deal in terms of cinema advertising companies. You had three major ones. Now you have two majors in an NCM combined with Spotlight and also Screen Vision. On the vendor side, hours before the Netflix winning bid was announced, we heard that Versant, the parent company of Fandango, had acquired Indie Cinema Group, a POS provider, which has been increasing in market share and really emerging as one of the top competitors to Vista, which is the leading POS company in the cinema space. So you see consolidation on the vendor side. And then finally, now the studio consolidation, which at this point last year, or a little bit earlier than this point last year, is Sony buying Paramount, ended up Skydance doing that. So we're closing up the year with major acquisitions across all facets of the cinema industry. We ended last year with the potential of a major studio being up for sale, and this year with the reality of another studio being bought by an existing company.
I need a drink.
I think we all do. This M&A isn't going away. Whether this deal stands or collapses, we have to brace for the reality that the industry is contracting across several different influential levels. It's not just about Netflix. It's not just about Warner Brothers or Paramount. We see it everywhere. Now, at the center of this entire conversation is, okay, Daniel, granted, the industry is contracting, but will there even be an industry to speak of if Netflix, the streamer, takes over a legacy studio like Warner Brothers? I know that's a concern, and that leads us to the Ted Sarandos publicity tour, an executive whose entire career has been spent giving spicy quotes to beat up theatrical and to denigrate the theatrical experience and to cheapen the theatrical experience and to insult cinema operators. Now, all of a sudden, here he is, superhero, savior, protector of cinemas, saying, oh, no, we would never do anything to hurt the cinema industry. We believe in it. We wouldn't destroy the value of something we'd be acquiring. Warner Brothers, of course it's going to be our theatrical division. I don't buy that for a second.
I'm not going to put anything in writing, or I'm not going to say anything
he'll promise you. He'll promise you he will. A part of those promises is a promise that all of the Warner Brothers releases that would receive a theatrical release will continue receiving one under the Netflix banner. Now, he did say in the same breath that we have to get used to shorter theatrical windows that are, quote unquote, more consumer friendly. You know what I think is consumer friendly, Mr. Sarandos? Not have to drive 40 miles to find a theater. That's what I think is consumer friendly. Making sure that there's a theater close by that is employing people, that is helping out the local economy, making sure this is sustainable business. Yeah. That's what I consider consumer friendly.
I'm just having flashbacks to 2021 when it was Warner Brothers that put their entire slate online day and date. And in the wake of that, we really saw from Unique specifically, I believe, really concrete data and facts about the fact that if you put a movie up online, concurrent, or we're talking a couple of weeks, in theory with the Netflix deal, or a couple of days, those go to piracy websites immediately, right away.
It's an executive who does not realize or does not feel like putting any thought into an industry beyond his own company. We
see this happening. We're just going to see movies are going to be like not making the sorts of money that they did.
We do have to say Netflix does give periods of theatrical exclusivity to its films. Right now, the window that they've been working with is a 17-day window. So let's go into the what we don't know part of the conversation. We know that Netflix is saying if we buy Warner Brothers, we will still put Warner Brothers movies in theaters, but don't expect a 45-day window. That's an explicit thing that the CEO of Netflix has said about this specific deal. In saying that, we're looking at the data and we look at a number of 17-day windows from Netflix that have hit the marketplace. Now, here's the problem with the Netflix 17-day window. Yes, it's the same 17 days that Universal gives a lot of its focus features titles. The difference is after those 17 days, those focus features titles hit PVOD at $20 a pop rentals for 24 or 48 hours, as opposed to going straight into Peacock, which would be the equivalent of these movies having a 17-day run in cinemas and then going on Netflix. So that is a structural basic difference on the 17-day window. And I would add to this point that, yes, I understand that Mr. Sarandos is in a publicity campaign insisting that Netflix is not anti-theaters, insisting that this shorter windows thing is going to be consumer friendly. I'd like to argue that a 17-day window is an anti-theater position. Now, the follow-up question here that we have to start asking ourselves as an industry is, if we were to have to adapt to a reality where a 17-day window is something that is there, that we need to exist
17-day window directly to streaming.
That we need to, exactly. If that's something that we need to contend with, if we get into this short window reality, the only way this is viable, and I'm not even sure it's viable, I'd have to hear from our folks in the industry.
Theaters have to take a much bigger piece of the pie for those 17
That's the
days.
only way this works. And it only works, honestly, with, yes, a shorter window would only work with a larger percentage per ticket staying in the theater, and B, it would only work with volume, meaning it would only work if this happens with an increased output of films. To move forward, I think the 45-day window is really something we have to fight about. That's at the heart of this, because we can't avoid consolidation, but we have to protect the exclusivity window in whatever happens moving forward.
Yeah, Sean Baker at the Red Sea Film Festival, he's the head of the international jury there, saying we should not reduce theatrical windows. We should be expanding them. This is how a filmmaker wants you to see his film, and everybody else can wait for it. And then he said, my next film, I don't care what happens, I'm going to get a 100-day theatrical window.
Good
for him. Good for him.
Yeah. And that's, a friend of the podcast. I know he's a listener. He's been on here before. This is a guy that walks the talk and walks out with a Best Picture Academy Award. A great amount of respect I have for someone willing to put his face and his name and his reputation out there like Sean Baker. I'd love to be able to sit here, guys, and say these are all the filmmakers that have come in support of this. We don't have a big list. We have James Cameron. Very few people have come out forcefully in defense of what we're doing here. And I am very appreciative of the ones who have.
Yeah, we have a lot of vague statements about the power of the cinematic experience, which we can all agree with. But
you know what? Those platitudes are fine for CinemaCon. That's fine. But mean them. Make business decisions based on them.
Yeah.
And I truly
you're going to have to give something, something has to give, because Sarandos does not care about movie theaters. He doesn't, beyond what they can do for him as a marketing tool for his films.
We can hear the statements of a chief executive trying to get a dubious acquisition through the regulatory powers that be and take him at face value and believe him. Or we just have to look back at every single quote he said about our industry for the last decade plus and realize they've all been negative. They've all been caustic. They've all been abrasive. It's never
the
been
movie theater model is
together.
outdated. The cinemas are dead. They're irrelevant.
You want to believe that guy? Good luck. That's fine. Now,
it's
not about believing him or not. We might have to be working with him, right? And that's the reality we're in, where we might not have a choice. And we have to adapt to a reality that might end up a couple of years from now on a 17-day window with a half-assed marketing campaign to maybe see this in a theater, but don't forget this is opening in Netflix in 3 weeks. That's the reality we have to prepare for. And it's not about being upset. You can tell we're already worked up. But it's about being prepared. And this is the call for exhibition. Don't get mad. Get ready. Get ready, because this isn't going anywhere. And if it's not Netflix, if it's not Warner Brothers, if it's not Paramount, it's going to be something else. Get ready. Get ready to adapt. Get ready to fight back. Get ready to market on your own.
Because we've seen how
content streams.
We've seen how Netflix works with the theater industry. They have a couple theaters. I mean, we've seen they are not interested in sharing box office. They aren't interested in sharing information. They aren't interested in being equitable to independent theaters or to smaller chains, which is something, admittedly, that you can say about at the larger major studios too.
What would be very interesting, Rebecca, is what does a Netflix Warner Brothers or Netflix presentation look like at CinemaCon 2028? Is there even a presentation at that point, right? There's the other question that you alluded to a second ago. Do we get box office numbers for Warner Brothers movies moving forward? How does ComScore deal with this? That's going to be a big question. And then finally, the other half of this equation is, okay, what happens in a world where the Paramount hostile takeover or counterbid ends up winning? And we are going to be just as harsh with the Ellison clan as we're being with the Sarandos part of this conversation. Now, David Ellison has gone out in the press and promised 30 theatrical releases per year in a combined Paramount Warner Brothers. That sounds wonderful. I don't buy that for a second.
No.
That is ludicrous. I can't remember the last time one studio put out 30 theatrical
Warner
releases.
Brothers doesn't even have any. They haven't even had any new movies out since.
They put how many out this year? 11?
Q4? Nothing.
A combined Paramount Warner Brothers this year didn't put anywhere near 30. It's probably closer to 20. So listen, it's a great thing to say. It's wonderful to hear. It's hard to believe. And yes, I think right now everybody wants to believe it, but it's hard to believe. And I'm not sure that there's a good version here, going back to the poop sandwich part of the conversation. I think at the end of the day, whether it's Paramount, whether it's Netflix, we're arguing about the bread, but it's still poop inside and we're still eating it.
We got to have a more positive transition point
No,
to Christie
I'll
than
find
that.
other than shit sandwich, yeah. Well, let's put a pin on this for now, guys. I think that's enough crash out for the year. We'll be updating this story as more developments occur on our website, boxofficepro.com, and in our upcoming print issues over at Box Office Pro magazine. Let's move over to the nuts and bolts part of the industry, because we had a fantastic box office weekend last weekend that no one seemed to be talking about, unfortunately, with the top two films in the marketplace combining to over $100 million in domestic box office. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 from Universal overperforming in its opening weekend, grossing $64 million. That's ahead of the $45 million ceiling that we were anticipating for the horror sequel, and the biggest opening weekend for Blumhouse this year. Now, that $64 million over performance is still considerably below the $80 million bow of the theatrical and streaming day and date Five Nights at Freddy's 1 that opened a couple of years back. But we do have to say this, we may not have seen it on opening weekend, but we did see it starting on week 2. There was a massive drop-off for Five Nights at Freddy's 1 to the point that it ended up grossing $137 million domestic after an $80 million opening frame. So we do expect, after a $64 million start, the sequel to either match or exceed the theatrical gross of the original domestically. And, that's good news. We unfortunately can't say that about Wicked for Good, which is dropping off in pace quickly. After 21 days in release, the second part of the Wicked musical has grossed $297 million domestically, as opposed to the $336 million earned by the first part of the two-parter. Now, this happens after a big opening weekend bump for Wicked for Good, but decreasing grosses in subsequent weeks. I still expect Wicked to be one of the highest grossing movies of the year. I'm not sure if it has enough gas to beat out Minecraft or Lilo and Stitch at this point. Looking forward, we've got this weekend an expansion from Hamnet from Focus Features. That's Chad Kenner's favorite movie of 2025 so far. And we've got the debut of 20th Century Studios' Ella McKay opening up as well. Quiet weekend, which we expect Zootopia 2 to lead in close competition against Five Nights at Freddy's 2. But then after this is cause for celebration. We've got the opening weekend of Avatar Fire and Ash lined up for December 19th. The latest forecasting here is pointing to an opening weekend between 100 and 120 million. So, word of warning from now, it's not tracking to match or beat the last Avatar movie that came out, but I do think is going to be a strong performer and one where we could see a $400 to $500 million domestic gross when all is said and done. And now to talk to us a lot more about technology, its potential, and the latest innovations coming out of Cine Asia, which took place this week in Bangkok, is our colleague Alan Fernandez from Christie Digital, speaking in an interview with our very own Rebecca Polly. That is coming up after the break.
Everyone's asking, what's next for cinema? What's the new thing? We've been watching films forever, and the medium's constantly changing, whether it's the type of stories we tell or the technology we use to tell them. The upcoming new technology from Christie called VDR enhances their existing CineLife real laser projectors with advanced contrast and better energy efficiency. The vivid, dramatic darks, brights, and colors stand out as a striking new reason to go to the theater. At this level of contrast, there's an extra sense of emotional connection with a film. It's a must-see for moviegoers once it debuts later this year. Christie also demonstrated VDR's capability of reducing energy consumption with an aim at sustainability and longevity. If you're curious about this upcoming technology, you can find out more at christiedigital.com/VDR.
And I am joined here on the Box Office Podcast with Alan Fernandez, Senior Project Manager at Christie, which is, as always, doing great work to elevate the cinema experience through some high-tech projection technology. Alan, how are you doing today?
Good, Rebecca. How are you?
I'm good. I know you're just back from Cine Asia, so I imagine a little bit of jet lag going on. But for those who maybe weren't able to attend that show, can you give me a little bit of info on what Christie had going on there?
Sure. Yeah, we had in the MR1, we had our typical full portfolio of our cinema projection platform, but we're showcasing a new platform called the RGBH. Two models, 15 and 20,000 lumens. So they're CP4415M and CP4420M RGBH projectors. These are some of the 4415 is at 43 dB, and the 4420 is at 49 dB. So they're really good for small boutique cinemas as well, where maybe there is no projection booth and sound is a concern. But they are based on the newest small chip 4K chip from Texas Instruments, the illumination chip called the DMD. So that's what allows us to make this projector a little smaller, a little more compact. But the real showcase and the real highlight of this projector platform is its illumination source. So traditionally, we've built pure RGB laser projectors, pure RGB meaning you're illuminating with a red, a green, and a laser device. And then there's another technology called laser phosphor, where you're creating light from just using blue lasers and a phosphor. But not getting too technical, one is more efficient than the other and has wider color, which is pure RGB. But RGBH is basically a mixture of the two. It's a hybrid. So we're actually taking both technologies and mixing them together for the best on-screen experience. And when I say on-screen experience, it can be tailored to, whether that auditorium has a high gain silver screen, for example, and sometimes those can cause some issues with laser projection.
So this is a smaller package. It's fit for, like you said, cinemas. Maybe you don't have a projection booth, smaller, more boutique cinemas, but you still have the premium quality that moviegoers want.
Absolutely. And I think the one way to put it is you're going to have the best on-screen performance based on the screen that you have. Mm-hmm. So if you can optimize that projector output for the type of screen that you have, that's how you're going to get the best presentation moving forward. So the key benefit is this projector can operate in a hybrid mode, which is really good for high gain screens. And a lot of high gain screens have been deployed because they're more affordable, right? Sure. Because that allows you to put a smaller projector in that auditorium. You don't have to pay for a 30,000 lumen projector. You can probably go with a 20,000 lumen. But there's some inherent artifacts that come with that. With pure
and the
RGB.
Alternative is the matte white, is the
that's right.
higher end, higher quality, higher price tag.
Matte white is always the best quality, but of course, you take more lumens to get there. And what this projector allows you to do is actually configure the light source. So you can have more of a phosphor mix with RGB for those high gain screens to optimize the performance for that. And then for your matte white screens, you can go pure RGB for like super wide color gamut, better contrast. So you can actually do both with this projector based on the screen that you're projecting on.
How does that impact ecological sustainability aspect of the conversation? Because with laser and Christie specifically, you've always really had very, very sustainable, very ecologically conscious products. And laser helps you do that. But with all these being able to hybridize it, is that still part of the equation?
Absolutely. There's two parts to that. Obviously, one is you want to reduce your environmental footprint. Everybody wants to do that. The second part of that is you actually save a ton of money in the process because you're operating with a fraction of the electricity cost. Pure RGB laser technology was really what changed the game for energy efficiency, essentially. 2 to 3, 4 times more efficient than a lamp-based projector. So that's pretty significant when you talk about 10, 15 years of operation. It adds up really quick. This hybrid technology is no different. It's using the exact same laser devices that are used in the pure RGB real laser platform. Again, now we have a smaller 4K chip that also has more efficient cooling systems, basically the most efficient projector that we have in the portfolio today and probably in the world for cinema projection.
Great. That kind of leads into what I wanted to ask you next. And Christie's known as a company that really has a huge range in terms of your technology. There's something for everyone from like a boutique cinema to the most technologically advanced, largest premium screens. What does this RGBH technology and this new MR1 line, what does that sort of add to the equation that maybe wasn't there with Christie's line beforehand? Or
yeah, I think one thing that hasn't been able to be addressed in the industry is on the creative side. So in post-production, there's a problem with pure RGB laser projection. And not only just pure RGB, other types of laser projection compared to lamps. Without getting too technical, it has to do with how you and I would perceive color on the screen, right? With a lamp-based projector, it's very broad spectrum. You and I are going to agree that white is what white should look like. For example, with pure RGB, you get into this issue with something called metameric failure, which is where you and I might disagree on what that color should be. So you can imagine when you have a colorist in post-production or multiple colorists that can't agree what that white point should be because their eyes are actually absorbing wavelengths slightly differently. And it has to do with lasers being very narrowband primaries versus like very broadband, like lamp-based technology. What RGBH does is it allows you to add more of those wavelengths back into the illumination mix. And effectively, it's creating a solution that works for post-production, where they can actually confidently move away from lamp-based technology. Because right now, the vast majority of post-production is still using lamp-based projectors because of this major obstacle with pure RGB illumination. The RGBH bridges that gap by introducing that phosphor component to a pure RGB, along with adding more wavelengths in those pure RGB devices. We basically have projection technology that allows you to use laser-based illumination technology with what I would call like ultra-high gain screens. Screen gains more than 3. And there's a lot of them that were deployed over the last 5 years because of 3D, but also because maybe they're in regions where the business models were still evolving and there was more restraint on capital expenditures and things like that. So, allows them to choose a smaller projector. This allows you to show that on that screen with no perceivable speckle whatsoever.
And even if you first take the journey with this projector and maybe you don't have the optimal screen, you for whatever reason, you're able to kind of upgrade that later on down the process, right? I mean, this is a projector that can kind of live with you as you evolve technologically as a cinema.
Absolutely, right? You're gonna replace your screen typically once every 9 or 10 years is I would say the average. So having a projector that can adapt to, maybe you want to go with a matte white screen for your next screen, or you want to move that projector to a smaller screen and go matte white. And now you want like, those deep, rich, saturated colors. So you want to basically turn that projector into a pure RGB illumination, and you can do that with this technology. So it gives you a lot more flexibility, and let's call it future proofing. You don't know what's coming down the road in 5-10 years, and having a projector that can adapt to the widest net of scenarios is going to pair the best in the long term.
So we've seen cinemas adopt Christie's real laser technology, which is just beautiful, crisp images. You're not moving away from that, right? This new product line is an addition to that real laser line. Can you give us a little bit of intel on, what's going on with the rest of the line?
So in simple terms, real laser is anything that's pure RGB illumination. And then we have the phaser lineup, which is essentially anything that is not pure RGB. So it's got some kind of a phosphor element. So it might have red and blue lasers plus a phosphor, or have an RGB plus a phosphor hybrid system. And essentially, we're going to keep those in parallel. Pure RGB can go up to 60,000 lumens. So the real laser platform can get to the ultra high brightness PLF application projectors, whereas the phaser right now it's at about 20,000 lumens limited because of the small illumination device. But they're both going to stay in parallel. I think once you're below 20,000 lumens or below the medium-sized screens segment of the market, you become more capital constrained anyways, and there's definitely a lot more pressure on costs, total cost of ownership, and affordability of the projector, not just on the capex but opex as well. So we are going to definitely keep both in parallel. In fact, We actually have a new technology that's going to be coming out in 2026 that'll be released on Real Laser platform first, which is called variable dynamic range. Another way to enhance the on-screen experience, be greener while doing it, and save some money on the back end from an operational standpoint.
So I know high dynamic range, which is correct me if my simplification of the issue is verging on the inaccurate here. Basically, just a wider range of colors to make sure the colors are richer and truer to what the director intended. So I know that's HDR. Variable dynamic range. How is that different?
HDR, absolutely. Colors is a big piece of it, but in high dynamic range, what I would say the bigger piece of it is the dynamic range of that image. How dark can you get that image? How bright can you get it in the same scene, for example, or the range of that illumination technology? It's contrast. That's what you see when you go to a movie theater and wow, that image looked amazing. You'll know that it was HDR because it was marketed to you as HDR.
Yeah.
HDR is, you need that dynamic. It's very inherently very difficult to do in a projection-based technology. Most consumer TVs have some kind of HDR, built in. What VDR is it's kind of a step in between. Most auditoriums can't do HDR. I mean, it's not designed for. You have exit lighting that's getting light on the screen. You have all sorts of internal reflections where the maximum in theater contrast you could possibly get is, I would say, 10,000 to 1. Anything above that, you're not going to gain anything from it. Dolby Cinema, that's 1,000,000 to 1 contrast, but the whole auditorium is designed to really be dark and not have any light spilling onto the screen. So VDR is a way to take your 2,000 to 1 projector that you have, that's laser, that you have today, and maybe get it to 5,000 to 1 or 10,000 to 1 if you're using an ultra high contrast lens. So it allows you to, what I call, force multiply the contrast on screen in a way that also allows you to save some energy on the back end and extend the life of the laser devices themselves. And the way it's doing that is by, in simplistic terms, it's looking at every single video frame that's coming into the projector. It looks at what's my maximum brightness that I need in that frame, and how much headroom do I have between what my projector can actually display on screen. If I have some headroom there, I'm going to turn those lasers down. I'm going to remap my image and get way more black level detail. And I'm driving my lasers not quite as hard, which is actually allowing me to save energy on the back end. So that's what VDR does. It's going to be mainly a software upgrade for projectors that have been deployed and projectors that we're selling today on the real laser side. But RGBH will also get VDR at some point in 2027. It's a little more complex because of the hybrid illumination system. So but it will also get that technology next year.
Okay. So did you show off this VDR at CineAsia?
We kept the focus of the show at CineAsia for the RGBH launch. But that being said, we've been very excited about bringing VDR to the market. We are in an alpha testing phase right now, meaning we are working in a couple of movie theaters and testing content and routinely doing this day by day. And when you do that, this is a technology that's never ever been in cinema to this day. So there's kind of new charted territory. But my point is, we're always uncovering new content and uncovering new edge cases that show up that need to be addressed, right? Artifacts that might show up. Okay, we've covered a new edge case, test, tune the algorithm, retest, and deploy. And we're learning a lot. And we are going to push out the release of VDR until early spring of 2026, just to make sure we capture all of those edge cases and have a very seamless VDR experience to the market. So we are planning on launching into beta, which will be sometime in February. And then we'll roll that out into the plan is to have a kind of like a tiered release of VDR to the market with by model in the real laser portfolio. So from spring up until midsummer. And that's just ensuring that we're learning as much as we can and we're making the changes that need to be done so that VDR is, you don't know it's on. You just know that you're looking at a really great image on screen. That's right.
Cinemas it's not a one size fits all solution, especially if you're a cinema that wants to keep up with the times and continue to improve your technology. You can do that even if you're not at the highest of the high end.
That's right. Every cinema would love to have PLF technology in every single screen, right? That's it. But obviously there's a payback. There's a return on that investment. And that part of that return on investment, especially if it's a substantial investment that the exhibitor has to make, and it's for some kind of a premium experience, then they got to justify that box office return. Are people willing to pay that premium? Are you going to pay an extra $5 to come and look at this?
Like sometimes, I'd be willing to pay, I don't know, $50 for a ticket to get if it's an Avatar or if it's something.
For sure. Yeah.
But if it's, a different sort of, sometimes you're just good with the baseline level projection technology, which is still great and getting better.
Yeah. So that's my point. It's very difficult for that to make that push to, okay, I'm going to stretch, another $3 or $4 on my ticket. Whereas VDR is a little bit different. It's allowing you to improve the on-screen experience for a very low, it's basically less than the cost of a projector lens, and you get some cost of ownership savings on the back end. So it's not too often you get to come across an enhancement that saves you money.
It's always so great to go to these shows and see the latest in technology, to get to experience some of these innovations before you see them just at your neighborhood theater. But there's also, the element of, I guess, the social element to these shows, seeing all your colleagues, and for international shows. I mean, I always love seeing some of the things that these international cinemas get up to in terms of technology, in terms of design. I know some of those exhibitors you gave a couple of awards to at Cine Asia. Who did those go to?
Yeah, absolutely. We gave out a couple of awards. The first award was to Major Cineplex for Exhibitor of the Year, Major Cineplex, based out of Thailand. And the second award was for the Exhibition Pioneer of the Year to Emperor Cinemas out of China. And you'll see a lot of innovation coming from, like you mentioned, from these regions, from the APAC regions. Things like ScreenX, 4DX,
stuff that's
right.
Getting popular here was started in APAC.
Exactly. So there's a lot of innovation, and that's no different with with Emperor and Major. If you go to Thailand and you go to a major cinema, you'll know what I'm talking about. And same goes for Emperor. They're really making some major, technological advances within China, adopting, laser-based projection systems and immersive audio, and really elevating the experience for not just for the audience, but for the industry as a whole. So we really want to take some time to recognize that with Emperor and Major for doing that service to the industry.
It's so great to see all the diversity of experiences that the cinema ecosystem provides. And it's great to know that Christie has a tech solution for cinemas across that diverse span. You don't have to be the biggest screen, a multinational chain, in order to have that great projection technology.
Yeah, absolutely. We're basically just, our business is powering their business, and for our business to be successful, their business has to be successful.
Well, Alan, thank you so much. It's been great to catch up with you, and I can't wait to hit up the Christie at CinemaCon to see some of this exciting new technology developments you guys have going on.
Thank you for having me, and of course, you're more than welcome to stop by any of the Christie presentations at CinemaCon for a glimpse of the future of cinema. We're pretty excited to unveil what we're planning this year. So thank you.
And that was Rebecca Pauly speaking with Alan Fernandez, the Senior Product Manager over at Christie Digital. Earlier, you heard from myself and my colleague, Chad Kennerk. On behalf of everyone here at Box Office Pro, thank you for listening. And don't forget to tune in next week when we go over our final opening weekend forecast of 20th Century Studios' Avatar, Fire and Ash. We'll talk to you again next week.